episode is brought to you in part by Jigsaw Health. I have to say, I was so excited when Jigsaw reached out and said they wanted to sponsor the podcast because I have been using their products for years. And one of my absolute favorites is the classic adrenal cocktail powder. It's this wonderful blend of high quality sodium from high quality salt, potassium, and whole foods vitamin C. And I love drinking it in the morning. I drink it almost every morning to rehydrate my body because we know how important those electrolytes are for actually getting hydration into the cells. And we lose so much of that when we're under stress, as well as vitamin C. And vitamin C is so important for progesterone production. So I love drinking it in the morning, and sometimes I'll actually have it in the afternoon as well. But for people that like a little bit more variety and flavor, they also have different electrolyte powders like Electrolyte Supreme and their Pickleball cocktail, which is really popular as well. So if you're interested in checking them out, check them out at jigsawhealth.com, and you can use the code JESS10, JESS10, for $10 off your order. Thank you so much, Jigsaw, for supporting the podcast. Welcome back to the Just Cash Wellness YouTube channel, coming to you with another episode of the Fully Nourished Podcast. I'm Jessica Ash, functional nutritionist and integrative health coach, and this podcast is really about taking both a scientific and spiritual look at why it just seems like we as women are so burned out on a soul level. I want to explore together what it looks like to return to our feminine radiance and live fully nourished in a world where it feels really hard to do that. And with that being said, just as a reminder, everything in this podcast is for education and inspiration only and is not intended as medical advice. Please talk to the appropriate professional when necessary, and please use common sense before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle. So continuing the conversation from the last episode, we're talking about libido, and I find that it's so interesting that libido is the thing that so many women want to know about. I mean, I don't want to say I find it interesting. It makes total sense to me because we women as a whole are hurting for energy. And in the last episode, in part one of this, we kind of talked about the state that we need to be in to truly enjoy a sexual experience, and how opening up ourselves and surrendering ourselves and softening ourselves to someone is incredibly vulnerable. And our body, we can't decide if our body feels safe or not. Our body is just going to tell us and let us know that it's either going to relax and surrender and open up, or it's not. And I deeply believe that we as women, we have certain biological needs to really be able to enjoy ourselves during a sexual experience. And these things build on each other over time. They either add to our energy or they subtract from our energy. They either fill us up or they empty us out. And because our tissues are so receptive, when you look at the vaginal tissues, when you look at our pelvic floor or pelvic bowl, where it's really this diaphragm, that we have a diaphragm, the typical diaphragm that we think of our lungs that help us breathe, but we also have this diaphragm that's sometimes referred to as the pelvic floor, but I've been recently hearing it more referred to as the pelvic bowl, which I think is a much better visual representation. But all our reproductive organs, our womb kind of sits at the center of this diaphragm in the center of our body. And it's where so much of our life experiences, the things that have happened to us, some of the most important things are stored. I'm loving seeing how we're starting to really recognize how much trauma or how much of our experience we hold in our pelvic bowl, and how much of our stress and tension we hold within our tissues, within the vaginal tissues and the surrounding tissues and the actual pelvic bowl itself. Those muscles are often so tight. When we're experiencing stress and we're in a constant state of fight or flight, we are going to be in a constant state of tension. We're going to be legitimately clenching our butthole. Our hips are going to be tight. Our quads and sometimes our hamstrings are going to maybe be tight, or our glutes are going to be numb or weak. This is the core of us. And it can also be reflected in our jaw. It's really interesting because in the womb when we're developing, the same cells that make the tissues, the pelvic bowl, the vagina, the labia, the vulva, all the clitoris, all of these tissues are made from the same cells that develop our throat, our larynx, our actual jaw, the tissues surrounding our jaw, our mouth tissues. And we will often see the tension that we hold within our bodies, the stress that we hold within our bodies, if it's not flowing through us, if we're not receptive to life and we're not allowing things to flow through us, we will often hold all of the tension of our experiences, all of the tension of our stress, all of the tension of our survival in these two areas. And how many women do you know that struggle with all types of jaw issues, tight jaw, tension? And it's interesting because we have a lot of estrogen receptors within these places as well as progesterone receptors. And so you see this a lot when a woman is, her estrogen to progesterone ratio is imbalanced. She often holds so much tension in her jaw. And even in the literature, you see that they're starting to explore estrogen's connection to all types of jaw issues. So as we dive into this episode, I bring that up because I just am always amazed at how differently we as women need to experience life. We need to feel our way through life. We need to allow things to flow through us. We need to be, in the words of today's theme, penetrated by life. We cannot tight knuckle grip our way through life trying to logically process our way through life because it doesn't allow us the full experience that the feminine needs. But the reason so many of us are in this place is because we're in a constant state of masculine energy, and this is in turn draining us. It's taking us out of the present moment. We're expending way too much energy to stay there, and it's also really, on a physical level, so many women have low testosterone because either the testosterone is aromatizing to estrogen in the female body. If you're under a lot of stress, you're going to produce more and more estrogen, right? It's that hormone of growth and proliferation and newness. And so if you're in that constant fight or flight mode where you're seeking, trying more and more and more, hustle, your body will eventually start to either create more estrogen by turning testosterone into estrogen, or it will eventually just pull back altogether and we'll finally go into that frozen state. And in that frozen state, we're often going to be very low in testosterone because our body's trying to pull us back, pull the reins back, and pull our motivation back. And in doing that, we lose that insatiable desire or libido that we get around ovulation. And that comes in the days that lead up to ovulation and the days that follow ovulation. But I think where we get hung up and what I haven't really seen discussed is that testosterone is not the only driver of the female libido. Whereas in the male libido, you're going to see a very different type of libido. And, it's so interesting because with the rise of the feminist movement and the desire to displace men within society, I really see how we have started to view sex from a very masculine lens, and we do it at our own demise, right? Like the feminine libido is completely different. The feminine sexual experience is completely different, as it should be. Men are turned on by completely different things than women are. And libido, of course, as we know, goes so much farther beyond sexual attraction or even physical attraction. There's something more hungry or animalistic about it. There's something primal there. And obviously, we have a lot of pheromones that drive why we're so attracted to certain individuals. And it goes so beyond that kind of shallow lust, like, hey, you're a body, I'm a body, let's meet bodies. Like that to me is lust. It's like, I've got a need and you'll do. Whereas when you are in a place of alignment, and your partner is in a place of alignment and your pheromones are attracting each other, there is going to be an animalistic type desire there that is unmatched. And this is why what Dr. Sarah Hill, when she, in her book, Your Brain on Birth Control, some of her discoveries are absolutely incredible. But the one that really sticks out to me is how when women are on hormonal birth control, it completely changes their pheromones, and it completely changes the pheromones that their biology is attracted to. So instead of being attracted to pheromones that are a good biological match, that is a great complement to each other's immune systems, because the goal with, I guess we'll use the word mating. The goal with reproduction is to create really much stronger babies than you were, right? Where the goal is to make babies that are stronger and more physiologically advantaged than we are. But what happens when women are on hormonal birth control, according to Dr. Sarah Hill's book, is that their attraction changes to someone that has pheromones more like their brother. Like, they're attracted to a completely different type of man. And they're often attracted to men that are much more passive, or much more what I see as their as much more in their feminine energy, but tend to be a little bit more passive or submissive. And she even goes so far as to say that when women get off of birth control, they lose attraction to their spouse. Some of them have even lost attraction to their spouse and been attracted to much more, almost like what you would think of like masculine or high testosterone type males. I don't know why I just said males. I feel like I was like talking about specimens here. Like, I just mean men, just attracted to different types of men. And so I covered this a little bit more and deeper in episode 5, but we'll kind of go over the basics, which, remember that men have a 24-hour hormonal rhythm where testosterone peaks in the morning, or it should peak in the morning. Remember, we're speaking in shoulds because we live in a society right now where most people's physiology is not functioning how it should be, right? Men are not having the testosterone that they should. Women are not ovulating as much or ovulating as well, and so they're not making as much progesterone. So when I talk about how things are, or in their optimal state, that's kind of what I mean, is when things are functioning and when things are in balance, this is what's supposed to happen. But men have a 24-hour hormonal rhythm where testosterone peaks in the morning and then kind of declines or wanes throughout the day, because their rhythm really follows the sun or follows the circadian rhythm. And, our production of progesterone and testosterone and estrogen follows our infradian rhythm, or our 28-day cycle. I use 28 days as just kind of one blanket number, but I know everybody's cycles are a little bit different in length. But our testosterone production is really going to ebb and flow, and is going to be higher and lower at certain parts of our cycle. And I kind of already went over that before in part 1, but our testosterone really starts to increase a little bit closer to ovulation. So towards the end of our follicular phase, or middle of our follicular phase, we'll start to see a little bit slow rise of testosterone, and it really kind of peaks with ovulation, and then we'll kind of stay a little bit elevated but start to wane. And so kind of in the middle of our cycle, we have this like little peak of testosterone. And what that does is not only stimulates our libido, but it's going to shift our energy, right? And it's going to shift our desire, where we're going to maybe become a little bit more proactive in wanting sex. Our libido is going to shift to be a little bit more, I don't want to say predatory, but more like, I'm going to go out and find it, rather than I'm going to sit here and kind of in my molten lava flow and magnetize and invite it towards me, if that makes sense. So I'm going to keep the slow embers burning for the rest of the cycle, but mid-cycle is when that testosterone peak is really going to give us that little bit of motivation and drive, a little bit of that masculine energy to like get up and go get it. Or should I say go get some? But this goes deeper, right? Because going beyond that, when you look at men, they can become physically aroused within seconds. They can become physically aroused at the smallest thing, the smallest stimulus. And I absolutely believe, and this is more of just like a personal belief, I absolutely believe that males, because part of masculine energy is the extreme loyalty. I do think that sexual experiences shape males it teaches them to learn what to crave. That might have came out weird, but it just means that they are given this soft place to land. I'll just put it that way. Over and over again, and assuming there is real intimacy and attraction and loyalty there. And then, of course, assuming there's like an actual physical pheromonal sharing, partaking, I'll put it that way. I think that the male physiology can be turned on even quicker by just those physical, like being able to smell those pheromones or being able to be in the presence of that living, breathing altar, I guess we could say, as I said in the last episode. Whereas we can take a lot longer to become physically aroused. Some people even say that it takes about 30 to 45 minutes for our bodies to actually reach a place of true physical arousal, like true lubrication and true maximum blood flow, takes a good amount of time. And so many women, when they hear that, they're just like, well, how does anyone have time for that? Or most men won't do that much foreplay, or, which I'm like, okay. Or like, how does anyone have time to get fully aroused? And first of all, I think it's incredibly sad this is the place that we've gotten. I think that the media and porn have really confused us on how women's bodies work, on how we are so different and we have such different biological needs to be able to reach a state of true pleasure. And we think that our libido should reflect like I think like in movies, I think of it as like the 2-minute orgasm where there's such a short, it's like a 30-second clip, and people think that that's possible. And for most people, that's not possible. That's just not how women are wired. And they're definitely not wired to be that way with people they don't have safety with, they don't have intimacy with, they don't feel safe to be vulnerable with. There's nothing wrong with you if you don't like how it feels in the first 5 minutes. And that's where a lot of us, we're not allowing ourselves to become completely aroused. And so we don't feel the height or the state of pleasure that we are designed to feel most of the time. And I think that can describe a lot of our sexual experiences. And like I mentioned before, I think that our sexual experiences do build on each other just like men's do, maybe in different ways, where every time that we feel safe and opened up and surrendered and there's a deeper level of intimacy, you know, we're going to stay in a deeper state of openness, and there's going to be this kind of slow burning or almost like slow arousal just being around the person. If we're in our feminine energy, if we are present and in the present moment and experiencing life. But how many of us are in a constant state of survival, a constant state of fight or flight, whether it's because we're really undernourished, we're overworking, we're underappreciated, we're just not eating enough. I mean, I'm sorry, but when I'm hangry, my libido is smashed. When I'm hungry or I haven't eaten enough all day, my libido is smashed. I'm going to interrupt myself for just a second and say that this episode is brought to you in part by Cosma Beauty. Cosma is one of my favorite skincare brands because Stephanie is so passionate about making sure the fats in our skincare work for our skin and are not going to oxidize or go rancid. And she is really the OG when it comes to PUFA-aware skincare. Another reason why I love her products is they are essential oil free, and she is aware of how essential oils can interact with the skin barrier. Right now, I am wearing her vitamin C serum, which is a staple in my morning routine. It has to be because it makes my skin glow so much. And I think it's because she uses a special type of vitamin C that doesn't oxidize, and mixes it in with squalene oil, which is kind of an oil that's very similar to the sebum that our body already makes. So I love starting the day with some vitamin C serum on my face to give me that glow and the hydration that I'm after. If you're interested in checking out her products, make sure to visit them at cosma.com. That's KOSSMA. And use the link in the show notes if you want 10% off. Thank you so much, Cosma, for sponsoring this episode. And I think this is the challenge today of the female libido. You know, for most of us, we're living in a state where our libido is very low. It's just staying in this, if we gave it a range from 0 to 10, we're like at a 0 most of the time. And then we expect us to be able to just jump to a 10 at any given moment at the snap of a fingers or with just like a few neck kisses, you know? So beyond our hormonal fluctuations impacting our libido, which we need to be aware of, if we are not around the time of ovulation, so first of all, you know, every woman in my private community, when they ask a question, they know my first question always, have you ovulated? Are you ovulating? Because so many women, if you can't answer this question, the simple question, I don't know if I'm ovulating, that's really the first place that we need to go to figure out where we're at, just where we're at physiologically. But around ovulation, that is when we should have our most heightened sense of libido or be the most hungry and the most active. Because this is really the time when an egg is ready to be fertilized, and our body does have biological drives to get the egg fertilized. But once we shift into our luteal phase, and as testosterone maybe starts to wane a little bit, our progesterone will start to raise. And progesterone, if we have enough in relationship to our estrogen, it really does kind of calm us down and give us a sort of presence and the ability to experience our life and be at peace almost. It's an inner contentedness that I just cannot describe. Until you have experienced balanced and robust levels of progesterone, it's really hard to describe to somebody that has not. But progesterone is very pro-thyroid, so it's going to be very pro-metabolism. And if you're eating enough, if you're eating enough protein, enough carbs that is adequate for you, enough of the right fats, getting the right nutrients, getting enough sleep, getting enough sun, you'll often feel like that deep hum or that metabolic underlying energy behind all of your cells is going to raise. This is why your body temperature raises. This is why different things within the metabolism shift. It's from the impact of progesterone. Progesterone does stimulate the thyroid. It is very anti-stress. And when we have adequate progesterone, it's much easier to remain in the present moment, and it's much easier to stay within our feminine energy. And so if we are eating enough and if we are not so stressed, our libido can still be really, really strong under the influence of progesterone because it does have that kind of life force energy that comes along with it. But the libido, the feeling might actually shift from a more frenzied kind of like hunger or almost wanting to like go out and get it to a more, what I like to call like warm, melty lava. It's just a different type of libido. And then it's really interesting because when you look at the influence of estrogen on libido, it usually does one of two things when it's in excess. When it's in balance, it often will drive libido in a little bit of a different way as well. Hormones are usually at their lowest during our bleed, but some of us do get a menstrual libido. I know some women have told me that the question comes in like, why am I so horny during my period? And honestly, I think for some of us, it takes a little while for our hormones to drop off. What actually stimulates our menstruation to begin is a drop in progesterone. So once our corpus luteum produces our progesterone for us during the luteal phase, but it gets reabsorbed by the body. Usually it takes about 11 to 14 days. A good strong luteal phase is 11 to 14 days. And then as the corpus luteum starts to dissolve or disintegrate or get like kind of reabsorbed, it's not obviously creating as much progesterone. You'll see this big drop in progesterone, usually the last 24 to 48 hours of the cycle. And then once it drops low enough, that's when the bleed will actually begin. But for some women, especially women who are estrogen overloaded or have an imbalance of estrogen to progesterone, they can sometimes feel the residual effects of estrogen, sometimes even more after the progesterone drops off into the first couple days of their bleed. But typically, in a balanced place, our hormones are going to be pretty low. Both progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone are going to be pretty low while we're menstruating or actively bleeding. And then right after we stop bleeding, that's really when estrogen starts to rise. And depending on where our tissue balance of estrogen is, meaning how much estrogen we actually have in our tissues, because some of us have stored up quite a bit of tissue estrogen when we are not making enough progesterone or we're having anovulatory cycles. Every cycle that we don't ovulate or don't have enough progesterone, that can lead to more and more estrogen tissue storage. Or if we're in a very poor metabolic state, hypothyroid, our adrenals and our minerals are off, we can actually have more of the enzyme aromatase. And aromatase is the enzyme that turns things like DHEA and testosterone into estrogen within our tissues. So we can have excessive production of estrogen or excessive storage of estrogen, and that's what really can imbalance our estrogen to progesterone ratio. Or our liver is, our detoxification of estrogen is really poor. We're either not breaking it down in the liver or we're not carrying it out in the bowels and it's getting reabsorbed. So those are some reasons why we can get to a place where we're a little bit more estrogen overloaded, or we have a little bit more estrogen in relationship to progesterone. Estrogen is interesting because it can do two different things to the libido. It can like put a kibosh on it, or for some people, it gives them an insatiable need for sex with unsatisfying climaxes. I find that really interesting. So I kind of touched on that before where, men, if they're moving into their feminine, they're consuming a lot of pornography, they are in a constant place of their sexual experiences, are someone coming to them, it's really easy, and they don't have to do any type of giving, they are going to produce so much more estrogen. And in men, a lot of times, this will create a more insatiable need for sex, but the sex is less satisfying. The climaxes are less satisfying. And this can happen to women as well. You see this happen to women a lot who are in estrogen overloaded states where their estrogen is imbalanced. They will say like, why do I just have a constant just craving for sex? Like it's never enough. And this is something that people should kind of look at too, because this is always a possibility. There's a real big difference between a strong kind of continuous libido and this kind of just like physical urge. But at the end of the day, we've really talked about how we as women don't run on thin air, and we definitely do not build another human being out of thin air. Healthy children are built from an overspill of energy. And so our life force, our reproductive energy really does require us to keep our cups full with nourishment, right? We want our cups to run over because that's really when females and the feminine actually create. We create from an overspill of energy, which is why we are first receivers before we can be givers. We have to receive first before we can pour out. And you can see this broken down into a much smaller level. Vaginal lubrication, it requires us to be hydrated, which requires us not just to drink enough water like people say, but we actually need the minerals that allow the water to be utilized appropriately within the cell. It also requires fat-soluble vitamins. We need enough retinol, we need enough vitamin E, we need enough vitamin K2. These are things that actually help us regulate the health of our lubrication. Proteins themselves. Vaginal lubrication really comes from tissues that are soft and not hardened by calcification or hardened by tension and trauma. If we're holding a lot of tension or experiences within our pelvic bowl or within our actual reproductive organs themselves, or our vaginal tissues, we're going to have a hard time getting blood flow. Nervous system and nerve communication to the area is going to be cut off. We're going to have a harder time feeling. We're going to feel more numb or disconnected. And then when you think of even cervical mucus, which cervical mucus, that stuff is gold. It is what really allows sperm to make it. It's what allows sperm to mature and stay alive. And the interesting thing too is a lot of women don't know this, but the female body actually chooses the sperm that's going to be allowed into the egg. So, I think a lot of basic biology explains it as like the sperm chooses the egg and like the sperm that wins just makes it. But that to me is not the reflection of energy, right? And so when you look at the science, it actually is that the egg chooses which sperm it wants to receive. And that, of course, aligns more with the order of nature and our understanding of energetics. And so really high quality cervical mucus requires a strong vaginal microbiome, yes, which is tightly regulated by both estrogen and progesterone, and then therefore the minerals behind those hormones like copper and iron and selenium and magnesium and things like that. But when our estrogen to progesterone ratio is imbalanced, we're going to see a really big shift in the vaginal microbiome, and we're going to see a shift in the amount of lactic acid producing bacteria, which is sometimes allows fungus to become strong. And that's where women will have kind of chronic, even low grade yeast infections or just full blown yeast infections or bacterial vaginosis. But behind it all, we really do require nourishment. And nourishment does start at the physical level. Our libido is not just a direct reflection of our body's access to energy, but also the use of that energy. So if we're like, well, we're eating enough, like I'm eating every couple of hours, I balance my blood sugar, I eat enough calories, I don't over exercise, and my libido is still really squashed. Well, sometimes it's just a burnout. When we're in a place where our body needs rest and recovery, it's not going to want to spend a lot of energy on things that are going to result in reproduction. The more nourished we are, and as we replenish ourselves from a place of burnout, we will see that our body has more energy to put towards things like reproduction, rejuvenation, repair, and our libido often comes with that and follows that. We also can't deny, especially if we're in like a committed relationship or we're married, the dynamics of our partnership and the dynamics between two people is going to make a big difference. So that's why I hit both the spiritual side, the emotional side, the energetic side, and the physical side. Because yes, if we are getting enough protein, carb, and fat, we're balancing our blood sugar, we're focusing on nutrients, right? We're getting enough B vitamins, we're replenishing our minerals, we're replenishing our electrolytes, we're doing kind of all the physical things that we should be doing. And then we're not getting what we want. There's something sometimes deeper that our body is trying to tell us. Our body never lies. We can try to lie to ourselves and we can kind of try to float down the longest river in the world and be in a state of constant denial, but our bodies won't allow us to do that. Our bodies won't do that to us. Our body loves us so much that it practices that tough love of, I'm going to tell you the truth even though it hurts. Our bodies are not robots. And when we are overworked, undernourished, underseen, underheard, we feel completely out of alignment with our partner, completely unseen, completely unheard, completely underappreciated. We're full of tension. We aren't going to really want to surrender and open up. But then on the flip side, we have to remember what type of power we have over our men. And so, obviously I'm referring to relationships between men and women, but we as women need to be open to receive. If we are not, if we are in our masculine energy, men lose their purpose. They will naturally fall into a more feminine place, produce more estrogen, because that is how loyal they are. Their bodies are almost trained to respond to our energy. And this is a hard pill that I have had to swallow, and I think it can be a hard pill to swallow. But if we are not soft and we're not there to receive, our men lose their purpose. And they're going to be more passive. They're going to be more checked out. They're gonna have less of a desire to please us and make us happy because they're gonna feel like it's a competition. Because if there's two people within their masculine energy, it's a constant competition and a constant fight. And true men who are in their masculine energy are not going to desire to fight with their female partner. They're just not going to do that. True men are not wired to fight their female partner. And so they will often back down. And so if we're trying to constantly control them or mother them, first of all, we are not biologically wired to be attracted to the same person we are mothering and caretaking of and nurturing. That's just biology. That's the order of things. And so if you are mothering and constantly controlling and guiding your partner in every different direction, you're not going to be attracted to him, because there's nothing more physically unattractive than that for a woman. And that's biology, right? I think we can all understand why that is. But, the flip side goes, right? Where us being in our masculine energy is often the catalyst to this kind of breakdown. Because here we are, we take on all of the burden, all of the control. We're trying to kind of tight knuckle our way through life. Physiologically, we're paying the consequences, right? Our hormones are imbalanced. We're not producing as much progesterone. Maybe we're producing a lot of testosterone. Or we're also producing tons of adrenaline and cortisol. We're having to harden ourselves and build up walls against the stress because it just feels like so much, and at any point we're just going to crumble under the weight of it. Once we're in that place, that's total masculine energy, we will not have a strong libido and we will not be in the mood. It's nearly impossible. It is up to us, and it's our responsibility to be in our feminine energy. It's nobody else's responsibility but our own to start practicing awareness around that and to get ourselves into a better place where, asking ourselves the hard questions of what do we need for safety? What do we need for stability? What is my body trying to tell me? Because at the end of the day, our body is protecting us by reining in our desire or allowing it out. I almost think of it as a rope that gets pulled in or kind of lets it out, where our desire results in us becoming incredibly vulnerable, right? Our desire will result in that. And that requires us to feel safe, protected, and cared for, both emotionally and physically. Because as women, we have to feel safe in order for our physical body to function the way that we want to. That's just biological facts. That's how we're wired. And so first step is always nourishment when it comes to libido. Play around with food frequency, play around with meal density, try not drinking caffeine on an empty stomach. But then if you're eating enough, you're not over exercising, you're not overexerting yourself, then it's time to go deeper. Because at that point, your nourishment and your focus and all of the things that you've been doing to nourish yourself physically is now inviting you to go deeper. And it's up to you to listen. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Fully Nourished Podcast. If today's episode resonated with you and you liked it, please support the podcast by sharing about it on social media or sharing it with friends and family. It's always so helpful because I rely on women like you to spread the word. Thank you so much for listening to the Fully Nourished Podcast. I hope today's episode resonated with you. And I want to give a special thank you to our sponsors, Cosma and Jigsaw. Remember that if you want to check Jigsaw's products out, visit them at jigsawhealth.com and you can use the code JESS10 to get $10 off your order. If I mentioned any links or resources in the episode today, they are included in the show notes, which are linked in the description box below. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the podcast, please share about it on social media, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. I really rely on amazing women like you to help spread the word about the podcast, which means I also care about your feedback. So if you have any topics you'd like discussed or any guests you'd like me to bring on, please go ahead and submit those to me at jessicaashwellness.com/podcast. If you want more content or you want to stay in the loop about new episode drops, please follow me on Instagram at jessicaashwellness or sign up for my newsletter on my website at jessicaashwellness.com/email-subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you soon.